Being eaten alive is, from what I understand, not a great time. But here's the thing. Humans have been around for about 300,000 years, and in that time we've gotten pretty comfortable with the idea that we're at the top of the food chain, or at least close enough that it doesn't really matter day to day. We don't spend a lot of time worrying about being hunted because most of us live in places where the biggest predator that we encounter is maybe a coyote, and even then we're probably fine. But the ocean spent about 500 million years workshopping different ways to kill things, and by the time humans showed up, most of the really dangerous and creative stuff had already been tried and tested and refined to the point where it was basically foolproof. I mean, these creatures had jaws that could bite through bone in 20 milliseconds, or tentacles that could wrap around you in complete darkness, or teeth arranged specifically to make sure that once you were caught, you stayed caught. And the thing about all of these different methods is that none of them cared about being fair or giving you a chance, because evolution doesn't optimize for fairness, it optimizes for not starving. So I had the morbid and brilliant thought, what would it be like to be a human transported back into this time on a little diving mission in the ocean and be hunted by each of these creatures? Well, turns out it's not going to be fun. So we're starting 6,000 meters down, which is about 4 miles below the surface if you're keeping track. And frankly, if you are keeping track, you've already made several poor choices leading up to this moment. At that depth, the pressure is roughly 8 tons per square inch, which means basically nothing to you because you can't conceptualize that. But what you can conceptualize is darkness. Complete darkness, the kind where your eyes stay open. It doesn't matter because there's nothing to see. The water is near freezing. The silence is the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat in a way that's deeply uncomfortable. Now, the bigfin squid lives down here, and it's one of the animals that scientists have only seen about 20 times in the last 20 years, which should tell you something about how hard it is to find, and also how little it wants to be found. It's got a pale body, fins nearly as long as its mantle, and tentacles that trail down anywhere from 13 to 26 feet. Just hanging there in the water column at these weird elbowed angles that make it look less like an animal and look like some sort of eldritch nightmare. The interesting thing about these squids is that they're still alive today. But you know, the worst part about being hunted isn't the violence, it's the waiting. Just sitting there knowing something's coming and there's nothing you can do about it, which is sort of how I spend most of my time anyway, except instead of being eaten, I'm just waiting for things to happen. And I figured out recently that I might as well get paid for that, which is why this video is sponsored by Free Cash. The setup is simple. Play mobile games, take surveys, sign up for offers, and they pay you through PayPal, crypto, or even gift cards. Most people make $5 to $10 on day one just testing it out. And if you're using it a couple hours a day regularly, you're looking at somewhere between 30 and $100 a month, which starts to add up. It also has 250,000 reviews on Trustpilot with a 4.8 star rating with $50 million paid out so far. So you know it's legit. If you're interested in getting started, you can click the link in the description or the pinned comment. The first cash out minimum is $20. After that, there's no minimum at all. Thank you so much to Free Cash for partnering with us on this video. Now let's get back to talking about apex predators of the deep. Most of the creatures that we'll be talking about today are not still alive, but these things have been around before us and they're still here, so I thought it'd be fun to include them. But the thing about the bigfin squid is that they don't hunt the way you would expect because there's no chase involved, no dramatic pursuit. They drift basically, dangling those absurdly long tentacles below them and waiting for something to brush into the strands. And once that happens, the tentacles contract, slowly pulling whatever touched them upward toward the body. It's a fishing net that can think. So you're down there in your suit or submersible, lights cutting through the dark, and you feel something brush your leg. Just a light touch, almost nothing. It was probably just some little fish. But it's the kind of thing that you would ignore if you weren't 4 miles underwater. And then it happens again, and you turn, and in the edge of your lights, you see these ribbons trailing past. They're pale and thin and impossibly long. And you realize with a very specific kind of dread that you're already caught. The squid doesn't rush, and that's the worst part. At least in the deep, you had darkness working in your favor. Sort of, in the sense that you couldn't see what was coming, which depending on your personality might count as mercy. But if we jump back around 95 million years to the Cretaceous and drop you in a river delta in what's now North Africa, the visibility is just clear enough to see the problem before it hits you, which frankly doesn't help as much as you would think. Onchopristis was a sawfish, more or less, except calling it a sawfish is sort of underselling the situation because this thing was 13 feet long and half of that length was just its snout. It had an 8-foot long saw blade, specifically lined on both sides with barbed teeth that pointed backwards, and it used this whole setup to slash through schools of fish, injuring multiple animals with just one swing, which is efficient if you're the one doing the swinging, and significantly less efficient if you're the one getting swung at. Guess which one you are. The other thing about Onchopristis is its eyes sat on top of its head, which is a detail that tells you it spent a lot of time on the bottom looking up, watching for danger from above. This is ironic because Spinosaurus lived in these same rivers and occasionally ate these sawfish, so even the things doing the hunting were worried about getting hunted, which should give you some sense of how the whole ecosystem was just an ongoing disaster for everyone involved. Now you're diving in murky greenish water. Visibility is maybe 10 feet if you're lucky, and the first thing that happens is you feel the water move. Not see, but feel. A pressure wave, a displacement, and then something whips past your face close enough that you actually feel the turbulence. You turn, and through the silk cloud, you catch a glimpse of something long and flat with a snout that looks purpose-built for exactly one task, and that task is stabbing you. But real quick, if you're actively trying to get away from a prehistoric murder fish fight right now, you should probably hit the subscribe button and also like this video because that helps me out a ton, and hey, maybe you'll actually survive one of these encounters if you do so. If you thought a saw snout was weird engineering, the thing that came before it was somehow worse, because 360 million years ago during the Devonian period, nature looked at the concept of teeth and said, no, actually, we can do something much more disturbing than that. What it did instead was create Dunkleosteus, which was 15 feet of armored fish nightmare. It didn't have teeth at all, but rather had bony plates in its jaws that worked exactly the same way a guillotine works, which is to say extremely well and with very little room for error. The bite force on this thing was somewhere in the range of a T-Rex, which seems excessive for a fish. It could open its jaws in 20 milliseconds, which is 1/5 of a second, and that speed created a vacuum effect that would literally pull you towards its mouth before the mouth even closed in on you. So the attack sequence here is you getting yanked forward involuntary, you having about enough time to understand what's happening but not enough time to do anything about it, and then the jaws snap shut and whatever was in between them is no longer in one piece. Fossil evidence shows Dunkleosteus ate other armored fish, sharks, and occasionally delved into the fun little hobby of cannibalism, which suggests it was the kind of predator that didn't really care what it bit as long as the biting got done. The jaw blades would slice through shell, bone, cartilage, basically anything that could qualify as biological material, and it could do this repeatedly without the blades dulling because they were self-sharpening, which of course they were. Why not? We've already created this apex killing machine, we've gotta give it a knife sharpener. Why not? So you're in the Devonian water, reasonably clear, and you actually see this thing coming, which you think would help, but mostly what it does is give you a few extra seconds to shit your pants. It opens its mouth and you feel the pull. You feel that sudden wrongness in the water pressure, and then everything goes loud and then very quiet, and you go night-night forever. Look, Dunkleosteus had the decency to make it quick, which in the context of prehistoric ocean murder is about as close to mercy as you're gonna get. But 85 million years later in the Western Interior Seaway, which was this massive inland ocean that cut North America in half, there lived something that preferred a more hands-on approach. And by hands-on, I mean it wanted to make sure you understood what was happening before you died. Tylosaurus was 45 feet long, which is about the length of a city bus if buses could swim, and also had the personality of a very insane serial killer. It looked sort of like what would happen if you took a giant monitor lizard, gave it flippers, and 6,000 gallons of steroids. It had 2 full rows of sharp teeth, plus a bonus set on the roof of its mouth, just in case the first 2 rows didn't get the point across. Fossil evidence shows it ate fish, sharks, seabirds, plesiosaurs, and other mosasaurs, which means it basically looked at the food chain and decided the whole concept was stupid and it'll eat anything anyways. The thing that made Tylosaurus particularly unpleasant though was that it had a strategy. Most of these animals just hit you and figured out the details later, but this one had a whole process, and that process started with ramming. Not biting, ramming. It would charge at you and smack you with the blunt end of its snout, which doesn't sound that bad until you remember it weighed several tons and was moving at a pretty fast speed. So what happens is your ribs crack and you're suddenly trying to breathe through what used to be your chest cavity, but your chest cavity doesn't really exist anymore because all of your ribs have collapsed inward and your lungs are punctured. And then while you're dealing with that and probably your suit is leaking oxygen, the hit and circle method meant that you were very aware of what was coming next, which was the actual bite. And the actual bite involved teeth that didn't slice as much as they just punctured through things and held. Safe to say, you became sushi that night. Now, strategic killing is scary, sure, but there's a special kind of terror that comes from something that doesn't strategize at all and just operates on pure, unfiltered rage for eating. Xiphactinus was that thing, and it was 16 to 20 feet of what can only be described as ambition in fish form. Basically, this animal regularly attempted to swallow prey that was half its own body length, and sometimes that worked and sometimes it died in the process. And there's actually a famous fossil of a 4-meter Xiphactinus with a 2-meter fish perfectly preserved in his rib cage because it choked to death trying to eat something that was clearly too big. This fish could not be reasoned with. There was no negotiation. I mean, look at its face. That's not a negotiating face. It had one setting, and that setting was see something, eat something, ask 0 questions. And it applied this line of thinking to everything it encountered, which included you if you happened to be swimming in the wrong Cretaceous seaway at the wrong time. The body was built for speed. It was streamlined and muscular, with a tail that could generate enough thrust to catch actual fast-swimming sharks. Its jaws could open wide enough to fit a human head first into its mouth in one go, which is exactly what it's going to be doing to you. So the attack came fast. You would see a silver shape coming at you, and then before your brain could process the information, your legs were inside of a fish, surrounded by dozens of inward pointing teeth that were designed to grip, not slice. This is literally the Grip Reaper, which meant that once you were in there, the teeth made sure you weren't coming back out. Pressure was immediate and crushing. Your ribs would be bending and snapping as the fish tried to work you further down its throat. It doesn't really understand the concept of chewing, and if you were lucky, the shock would kick in right then, and then you would stop caring that you were being swallowed whole by something with the dietary restraint of an unsupervised dog. I mean, have you seen my dog? He will eat literally anything he can get his hands on, including my smelly socks. If you were unlucky, you would stay conscious long enough to feel yourself sliding backward into something wet and dark. And if the Xiphactinus was unlucky, it would die because you were too big to eat. But in this situation, it's just having a good meal. Getting eaten whole is at least over relatively fast, assuming the fish doesn't choke and trap you in a fossilized crime scene for 300 million years. But back in the Carboniferous period, about 300 million years ago, the swamps had a different approach to killing you, and that approach involved a lot of very small things working together as a team, which is somehow worse than one big thing working alone. Tully monstrum was about a foot long, which sounds harmless until you learn it was probably related to lampreys, which are these things. They are the nightmare eels that latch onto things with circular sucker mouths and rasp away at flesh using a tongue that is literally covered in teeth. Except Tully monstrum had this weird trunk with a claw at the end and eyes on stalks that stuck out from its head at right angles. So it looked less like a fish and more like something designed by my 5-year-old cousin who loves dinosaurs way too much. No, little Jimmy, there is no way a Stegosaurus is beating a T-Rex. I do not give a shit what you think. Your idea is stupid. Go back to school, read a damn book. Oh, listen, I'm not letting little Timmy understand that a Stegosaurus is gonna beat a T-Rex. Come on. You'd be wading through a Carboniferous swamp with warm, murky water up to your chest. Your visibility is maybe at an arm's length if the silt hadn't been kicked up yet, and the first indication that something was wrong would be a brush against your leg. Just a light touch, easy to ignore, the kind of thing that could be a stick or a plant or any number of non-threatening swamp stuff. But then it would happen again, and you would feel a pinch, sharp and sudden, and you'd look down into brown water and see nothing but your own legs disappearing into the murk. And that's when the rest of them would arrive. Tully monstrums didn't hunt alone, apparently, or at least there's enough of them in the fossil record clustered together that scientists think that they might have been social. And social in this context means multiple 1-foot lamprey things all deciding you looked interesting enough to take a bite out of, which probably isn't going to be a fun time. So small things swarming you is pretty bad, obviously, but there's something uniquely terrible about being killed by a single animal that comes equipped with 3 separate ways to ruin your life. And that's where Protosphaerania enters the conversation. This was a fish fish from the late Cretaceous that looked at the concept of teeth and said, sure, teeth are fine, but what if we added a sword to the face and also turned the fins into knives just to cover all of our bases? This is what I personally like to call the demon swordfish. It was 6 to 9 feet long and built for speed in a way a missile is built for speed, and it had a pointed snout that could stab, pectoral fins with serrated edges that could slash, and a mouth full of extremely sharp teeth that could bite. So depending on which angle it came at you from, you were dealing with a completely different problem. The fins were the really interesting part, if by interesting you mean deeply concerning, because they had actual serrations along the front edge, which were little saw teeth that turned every pass into a cutting motion whether the fish was trying to cut you or not. Now you're in clear Cretaceous water, visibility is decent, you're trying to find a nice little starfish in the ocean, which you think would help you mostly, but what it does is let you see the thing coming and realize there's nothing you can do about it. The first pass happens fast. So it's a silver flash in the blue, and you feel a line of pain open across your thigh where one of those fins dragged through the wetsuit and kept going. Blood starts trailing and the fish is already gone, circling back, and this is the problem with the demon swordfish. It doesn't commit to one attack, it just keeps making passes. The second time it comes at you head on, and you actually see the sword nose aimed at your chest, and you try to twist out of the way, but the water doesn't let you move like that. So instead of a direct hit, you get a glancing blow that still manages to punch through your side just under the ribs. The third pass takes your arm, or part of it, when the mouth gets involved. And the fast repeated attacks would kill you eventually, assuming you don't bleed out first or just give up out of frustration. But 40 million years earlier, there was another animal that didn't bother with patience because it didn't need to. Basilosaurus was 50 to 60 feet of seagoing mammal that had the body plan of a snake and the bite force of something that regularly ate other whales for breakfast. We know it ate other whales for breakfast because paleontologists have found the chewed up bones of smaller whales in fossilized Basilosaurus stomach contents, which is the kind of evidence that doesn't really leave much room for interpretation. The name literally means king lizard, which is wrong because it wasn't a lizard, but it was a king. It was an early whale, but the people who named it didn't know that yet, and by the time they figured it out, the name had stuck. So now we're stuck calling a whale a lizard, which bothers exactly nobody except the people who care about taxonomic accuracy, which there's probably 5 of you watching. And I promise it's not that big of a deal. I understand it's wrong. It's not that big of a deal. What mattered about Basilosaurus wasn't what we called it, but what it did. And what it did was swim through warm, shallow Eocene seas, looking for things to bite in half. The hunting strategy involved ramming first, which seems redundant when you're already 50 feet long with a mouthful of teeth that can crack skulls. But apparently Basilosaurus wanted to make sure that you were paying attention before the actual biting started. So you would be swimming along, maybe near the surface because that's where the light is, and humans like light. And then something hits you from the side, hard enough to break ribs. And when you spin around to see what happened, you'd catch a glimpse of this long serpentine body coiling past, dark on top and pale underneath. Then it would loop back, and this time the mouth would be open. Fossil bite marks on smaller whale skulls show Basilosaurus specifically targeted heads, probably because brains are nutritious and skulls are easy to crack if your jaws are designed for it. Yes, this thing was an apex predator, and its favorite snack was brains. Getting your skull crushed open by a 50-foot whale is at least over quickly, which counts for something, but evolution looked at that whole system and decided it could be further optimized. 30 million years later, during the Oligocene, the ocean had squalodon, which was what happened when early toothed whales developed echolocation and serrated teeth at the same time, and then decided to hunt in groups, because apparently killing things efficiently wasn't enough. It had to be a team effort. Squalodon was 12 to 18 feet long, depending on the species, so not massive by whale standards, but big enough to ruin your whole day. Instead of smooth, conical teeth modern dolphins had, it had teeth with serrated edges that could saw through flesh and bone. The real problem wasn't the teeth though, it was the fact these animals could echolocate, which meant that they could see you using sound before you ever saw them. And the clicks and buzzes they made to build that picture traveled through water faster than you could process what was happening. So you would hear the clicking first, a high-pitched rapid pulse that would seem to come from everywhere at once because the water doesn't carry sound the way air does. And then you would see 3 of them coming out of the blue in formation, and that's when you would understand that you weren't dealing with an animal, You were dealing with a coordinated hunting party that had already decided that you were dinner and they were all going to carry out their plan. The first one would test you, maybe take a bite out of your flipper or your leg, just to see how you would react and whether you were worth the effort. The second one would disable, going for major muscle groups or joints. The third one would wait until you were compromised and then go for critical areas. And the whole time they would be whistling to each other, adjusting strategy, because they were mammals with mammal brains and they could solve problems. Unlike you, because you're not solving this problem. Their problem? Well, they're solving it. And that problem is eating you. Now, coordinated intelligence is terrifying when it's trying to kill you, sure. But there's a different kind of fear that comes from something that doesn't need intelligence because it already owns the environment completely. And 130 million years ago in the early Cretaceous, there was a plesiosaur that spent most of its life so deep underwater that seeing it meant you'd already made several irreversible errors in judgment. Basilosaurus was 23 feet long with a neck that took up about half of that. And it's probably my favorite prehistoric creature of all. I mean, just look at that name, Basilosaurus. That is one of the coolest names we could ever give something. And how it behaved is even cooler. Anyways, 23 feet long with a long neck that took up about half of that. And it had adaptations for deep diving that shouldn't have worked, but they did anyway, including eyes that were proportionally huge compared to other plesiosaurs because down in the dark, you need all the light gathering ability you can get. Its bones were also unusually dense, working as ballast so it could sink without effort. And its chest was broad enough to suggest that it could hold its breath for extended periods, which it needed to because it apparently spent significant amounts of time hundreds of meters down where the pressure would turn a human into a pool noodle. The thing about hunting that deep is that stealth isn't really a skill you need to develop. It just happens automatically because there's no light and sound travels strange and everything is already working against the prey by default. So Basilosaurus would drift in the dark with those massive eyes picking up any trace of movement or bioluminescence. By the time you knew it was there, it had already decided that you were food. You would be in some kind of deep diving pressure suit, lights cutting through the black, and the first sign would be those eyes reflecting back at you from just beyond your light's reach. You would see two huge green circles, unblinking and getting closer. Then the shape would resolve, a long neck extending towards you in a way that seemed wrong because nothing that big should be able to move that quietly. And you would have maybe 3 seconds to understand that you had no chance out swimming it. You couldn't fight it, and you definitely couldn't survive it. The environment does half the work, and that predator just needs to do the rest. Now, deep sea predators kill you by hiding in the darkness, which is bad. At least there's an alien quality to it that makes the whole thing feel almost impersonal. But 165 million years earlier in the Jurassic, there was something that killed you with a method humans have been afraid of for as long as humans have existed near water. And that method is ambush from a crocodile, except this one lived in the ocean full time and had flippers. Metriorhynchus was 10 feet long, which is roughly the size of a decent alligator if alligators had decided land was boring and committed fully to the sea. It had a long snout packed with sharp teeth and a tail that ended in a fin for swimming and limbs that had turned into flippers because walking was no longer relevant to its lifestyle. Fossil evidence shows it ate fish and squid mostly, but also wasn't above taking chunks out of dead plesiosaurs if the opportunity presented itself, which suggests that it had an opportunistic feeding strategy that modern crocodiles have, where if it fits, it sits, and sitting is in its mouth. Now, you're in a Jurassic lagoon with warm, clearish water over a reef, and everything seems fine right up until the moment it doesn't. This crocodile hunted by waiting, which is what crocodilians do best, and it would hold position near the bottom or tucked against a reef edge till something interesting swam overhead, and then it would launch upward in one explosive burst of speed that ended with jaws clamped around whatever part of you it reached first. The teeth would punch through both of your legs at the same time, with dozens of sharp points driving in deep, and you would feel the pressure before you felt the pain as the bite force was significant. Then would come the rotation. Crocodilians have been doing death rolls for millions of years because the technique works, and what it does is turn a simple bite into dismemberment, and that involves you becoming a bunch of different pieces in the water. Death rolls will absolutely rip you apart, which is effective and has been refined over millions of years. But all of these hunters had limits, things that they wouldn't eat, prey that they would avoid, some kind of upper boundary on their ambitions. The Xiphactinus did not have that problem. And we know it didn't have that problem because paleontologists have found the acid-etched bones of other mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and large fish in the area where these things lived. The only animal around at the time that could have eaten and digested those animals was the Xiphactinus itself. This was from the end of the Cretaceous period, 66 million years ago, right before the asteroid showed up and reset everything. It was 30 feet long, built heavy, with a skull that measured almost 5 feet and teeth that were designed to crush bone rather than just pierce it. The teeth showed heavy wear patterns, which happens when you're regularly biting into hard armored prey, and there were bite marks on Thalassatitan fossils that matched other Thalassatitan teeth, meaning that they fought each other, possibly over food or territory, and those fights got serious enough to leave permanent damage. You would be diving in the warm North African Ocean that covered what's now Morocco. You might have even seen it feeding on something before it noticed you, tearing pieces off of a plesiosaur carcass with efficient twisting motions of its massive head. When it did turn its attention towards you, there wouldn't be any hesitation or assessment period. No curiosity about what you were, because the Thalassatitan operated on a very simple principle, which was, if it moves and it's made of meat, it's to be eaten. The first hit would be a ram. It would be that huge blunt head striking your chest hard enough to crack your sternum and probably collapse a lung. And then before you could process that, the jaws would close around your midsection. The teeth would meet in the middle, straight through your spine. You wouldn't survive the first bite, because if I'm being honest, nothing survived the first bite. This thing was a demon in the water. So there you have it. That's exactly what it would feel like if you were transported back into the ocean in a prehistoric time and were hunted by each of these apex predators. It doesn't really sound fun, but it's interesting to think about because all of these animals have very different hunting strategies that turn them into very different demons of the deep. If you enjoyed watching this video, make sure to give it a like and comment down below if you want to see more videos just like this with maybe different predators. List off some of your favorite predators that you would love to hear about. Make sure to also subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. And follow us on TikTok and Instagram where we post content we won't be posting here. And if you want to watch another one of our videos, then you can click the one that's on your screen right now.